the first thing I want to talk about is what kinds of conflict-based and information-based procedures. You tried a few. You tried the thing where people could ask leading questions, and also where there was a tendency to, what's the word I want? The tendency was to bring in, how does it relate to me kind of content, to relate the characters a little bit more. If I am reading that correctly, the result was rich but frenetic and overstuffed, so that the whole thing was spilling over with, conflict and trauma and fall apart and crisis, and they're stabbing each other with scissors before anybody can get a word in edgewise. Is that pretty much what happened? Or?
Yeah, I think that there were a few issues with that. With this game, part of it is there's a kind of, I think, pacing of development that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And in one revision, I was allowing all the players at the table to kind of leap in with clarifying questions, which really from the get-go developed all sorts of information very, very quickly, and conflicts and relationships and details that were coming out. Whereas I think that the way the game needs to work is at the beginning of the game, little pieces of narrative and conflict hooks, and things need to be kind of set floating out for the players to kind of think about. And then there needs to be a kind of gradual development that takes place in the course of the game from that.
Yeah, I will put several examples out that are why I agree with you. One example is the game Best Friends by Gregor Hutton, in which a group of female friends have a variety of envies and little hatreds among them, which are treated as sort of the fuel of play. It was a game with a lot of really interesting ideas, but one of the things that we quickly found was that in its final published version, it was very clear why different characters disliked one another. It was not at all clear why they were friends or what they were doing. So, therefore, play instantly became almost sort of a cat fight, a hair-pulling cat fight with no real sense of, it's kind of like everybody was aimed at each other, and there was really nothing to do but just go after each other. There are a few other games that fell into that problem, one of which I think was just before that. It was Jason Morningstar's The Shabalhiri Roach, which in its very first version was gentle and satiric, and through a variety of, I think, kind of hysterical improv ideals, turned into as gaudy a mess of crazed conflict that you've ever seen. Now, if that's not where you're going, if you're more into this kind of let's put things out there and let them float, another game you might want to examine is Nathan Paoletta's Annalise, which has an interesting mechanic by which these things are out there, floating out there, and then halfway through the game, the currency changes and they're not as easily made, and they go away when they're used. So in the first part of play, they proliferate. And I actually teased Nathan and a few designers who were working with this mode that it was like a Ripley Scott movie. There's always all this floaty shit in the air everywhere. And so, and I talked about what I really liked about Annalise was that after a little while, you stopped just putting it out there, and you started to use them, but you'd had a chance to see them in game without much mechanical impact each yet. And then as the ones we cared about kind of were grabbed, cemented, put onto sheets, and used in a much more powerful way, they were the ones that had finally kind of settled or coalesced around our characters. And it made a lot of sense, or makes a lot of sense. And so those are just kind of different ways that people have grappled with the same problem. And I think you've got exactly the right idea. There's no, there's nothing I can add, to your insight of, yeah, it worked for what I wanted it to do, but now that I'm, what is the joke from the joke of graduation? The thing that every student hears upon graduation, and it's kind of like, why didn't you ask me this in the beginning? Which is, you're tolerably good at what you do. Now you have to ask yourself whether it's worth doing.
All right.
And so we kind of learned the lesson on that one. A similar issue that you faced was the issue of having cards in there, which directly tie to the identifying the karmic, or not the karmic, identifying the morality of the universe.
Right.
This is where I'm perhaps being too intrusive. I can give you my opinion. I'm speaking as a player. My opinion as a player is that there will be quite enough of that at the end of play. And that not front-loading it is probably a good idea. Mm-hmm. It is supposed to be an emergent or a reflective moment, looking back and saying, now what was this? I thought it was awfully interesting in your one group that they instantly eliminated one and then kind of debated about it a bit. And I suppose that makes sense. A very wicked side of me says make it a random draw, but that's not really a recommendation. It's just an interesting thing to contemplate as to how the game would change if you actually drew for what kind of universe it was after all.
Yeah. What I've found out in actual play is, okay, so we originally had this idea that there would be a separate type of card that would be these Karma Universe cards, and that those questions would be ones that would illuminate more fully what kind of Karma Universe these characters were inhabiting. In actual play, the cards and the responses that you get to those questions have been helpful, although I don't think that they've been in any categorical way more helpful than the responses.
Than just doing things, right.
Than just like the other kind of questions and answers that happen. And when the players kind of sit down in the final stage of the game to kind of hash out in this kind of discussion debate process, what was this Karma universe that these characters inhabited? I think what the players do is that they are trying to kind of take in information from just basically all the responses that have been given in the course of the game and aren't kind of prioritizing or giving any adequate.
I completely agree, and I think that it actually is quite rich enough. If looking at a bunch of circumstances, decisions, triumphs and failures of a dead person's life isn't enough for you to have some kind of reflective conversation about what sort of moral universe they were in, then what is?
Right.
And I kind of like the idea of perhaps even forgetting to some extent that that's on the table while you're playing the characters and answering these rather more concrete and sort of viscerally engaging rather than analytical questions.
Right.
So I think you're on the right track with all of that. You made a lot of good tentative design decisions or summaries in your posts about that stuff. So I just really wanted to say that one of the reasons I haven't commented very well on your posts, although I am trying, is because you're kind of awesome, and so it's working, and I can't complain. With it's not even a matter of agreeing or disagreeing with your conclusions. You're just going through the process. I alluded in one comment to the possibility of straying too far in these ventures. Let's try it this way. Let's try it that way. Let's try it the other way. And perhaps losing a path. And so that's sort of my only warning, is that with a game like this, the desire to experiment with one more way to do it is pretty tempting. And after a little while, you're kind of like, blowtorch, where were we? What did we want in the beginning? What the equivalent in other role-playing games is when somebody designing who is very hyped about the Powered by the Apocalypse culture, and they just will not stop making up moves. They just won't stop. They're so excited, and they make more, and they make more, and they make more, and they make more. And pretty soon, they're like, well, a character could do this, so I better have a move for that. Oh, a character could do that. I better have a move for that. And they just keep going. And after a little while, you're saying, wait a minute. You're just kind of trying to model every imaginable activity that could occur in the game with a specific move. What was this game about again? What were we doing? What's the thrust of this whole thing again? And let's blowtorch and go back to the first 4 moves you made that you were so excited about. You see how well they were tuned toward aspects of that. And you've kind of created this spray instead.
Right. Well, yeah. And the other thing that will happen with that proliferation of moves is, for the players at the table, it becomes too much.
Right.
Because they're all kind of specialized, and they all have so much information that you have to process. And if you keep on getting more and more moves to think about,
right,
in terms of the actual implementation of them at the table, it gets so that a lot of them just aren't really used. I mean,
all of that's true. And do you see the analogy, however, to your situation? Because the analogy is real. So the operative pieces are different, but the phenomenon is the same. If you come up with, well, we could have a card that asks this, we could have a whole other category of cards. It does this. You have a really good combo that, if anything, could use some ironing and shaving rather than proliferating. Yeah. And the same thing goes for the procedures. If suddenly a brilliant idea for a mid-game step, a pause for a mid-game, discussion of the morality of the universe in the middle, that's great. It'll ground play for the second half. You see where I'm getting at?
Right.
Danger, Will Robinson. Let's play this game again, right? So
yeah, because the other concern that I have is, this is not a campaign game. This is a game that really, it needs to be.
You got to sit and do.
Mm-hmm. Correct, and I've had concerns about, and some other revisions that we've made that have lengthened it.
Right.
And it's clear that if the game stretches on too long, it is a game where you could break off a session and then take it up in the next session. But I think ideally, with the kind of way we're doing it, we really want to have it as a kind of concentrated 3.5 hour play session that would be really tight and really satisfying, and have this kind of rhythm to it that really builds and builds and builds. And, and I think the players really I think the gradual building is very exciting to the players, because,
it looks like it. Your videos show, that's one reason why I'm not really talking about the basic steps of play in the moment, because they seem to be there. That's fine, which is great.